So
I
good.
am going to be hiding myself and muting myself, and I will see you at the end.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I am delighted to be able to be here with you all. Although we might be a bit of a distance away, I am still having the opportunity to go on the book tour, and I'm making my way down. Eventually, I will end in the capital area, in the capital, and be there for the grand march that we're looking to do with Martin Luther King Jr. and others. But I right now am on my book tour, and I hope that you can see my book, The Long Shadow of Little Rock, which came out at the end of last year, and I am delighted to have be able to travel and share about my book and what is happening. So I do want to share a little bit about myself. Wendy asked if I would do that. And since many of the things I'm going to share are in the book, I don't want to dissuade you from buying my book, but I will share some of the things that I think are highlights, particularly as we are at a time where we need to continue to look at what the past has been and how we can change and what the future will be, particularly for our young people. I was not born Daisy Bates. My name is Daisy Lee Gatson, and I was born in Hutug, Arkansas. Now, the truth is, if you were to look at a map of Arkansas and you would go straight down to the bottom of Arkansas and then go over to the east, you would find Huttig. And it's such a small town that most of us would not be able to find it on the map. This was a town that was a lumber mill town. It was a mill town. We'd had lumber, and everything was focused around that mill. It was also a town clearly divided. Some of you all may remember or have been in places where there has been that clear division. There was literal train tracks. And on one side of the train tracks, there would be houses that maybe have 1 or 2 stories. Yards filled with grass and flowery plants, sometimes a garden in the back, and paved roads, very little of that Arkansas mud and dirt you might see. Then across those tracks, there would be houses, not one of them above 1 story. Many of them shotgun houses, as we called them. That is a house where there's a hallway all the way down from the front to the back, and all your rooms are to the side. They called them shotgun houses because if someone put a shotgun into your house, the bullet could go straight down and harm no one. We had that rich, rich Arkansas red clay that made up most of our yards. If you were fortunate enough, you might be able to have some flowering plants, but that wouldn't have been as important as having a garden. It was 2 worlds, one that was white and one that was black. But as a young girl growing up, that wasn't part of my concern. Most of you have been where a time where there was not color that stood in the way, and young children are good to be able to overlook color if you can play well with them. And so I played with white children all the time. But my first run-in with race happened when I was young, about 6 or 7 years of age. Now, some of us have to go back a while to remember back, but I won't forget that time for myself. We had a commissary there that was connected with the lumber mill, and everyone used the commissary. You put things on credit while you were there. And my mother said that I could go to the commissary by myself for the first time and get some pork chops. Well, I was delighted. I went on and with all the enthusiasm of a young child, and I went in, and there was the grocer, and I told him what we wanted. I told him what our account was, and he proceeded to begin to get our pork chop. But just as he was getting ready, a white woman walked in, and he completely stopped doing anything for me or even acknowledging my presence so he could take care of her. Then another white woman walked in, and he took care of her. And then a child walked in, about my size at least, if not age, and he took care of her. Well, I was young, 6 or 7 years of age. And as I said, some of you may or may not remember yourselves at that time, but you probably have been around others that are that young. You might remember what they do. The sighing, loud sighs, the rolling of the eyes, and sucking of the teeth, the lip poking out. My mama used to always say, if you don't keep that lip keeps poking out, it's going to fall to the ground one of these days, and it's going to stay just like that. Well, I was having one of those young child moments, rolling my eyes and sucking my teeth and such. When finally that little girl left, that grocer turned to me and he said, "Look here, girl, we take care of white folk before we take care of your kind." And he turned around and he started to cut up some of that pork. And I realized that he was cutting up the worst part of the pork chops, threw them into some white newspaper, white wrapping, and tied it up and almost threw it at me. Well, I got that wrapping and I ran home to my mama. I was highly upset. I could not believe that they would do that. And I was so mad. And I told my mama about that nasty pork chop and how I didn't want any nasty pork chop and I didn't need any nasty pork chop. We should take that pork chop back. I went on, and finally my mother said, "Tell your daddy when he comes home." Well, I was a daddy's girl. I don't know how many of you out there are, but I can see a few of you all smiling. I was a daddy's girl. And my daddy was my world to me. And he could do no wrong. So I sat on that front porch and I waited to hear from my daddy. And when my daddy got to the front, came around the front of the house, I saw him. I leapt off that porch and ran down to him and started complaining and telling him what it was and said, "We need to go back and take back those nasty pork chops. And that man shouldn't have talked to me like that." And I went on and on and on. And he kept telling me no and no. But I went on. And finally he leaned down to me. He took me by the shoulders and he looked me in the face and he shook me a little bit. And he said, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to bring trouble on this house?" And he had never talked to me like that before. He had never shook me like that before. It was a moment and a time. And I looked in his eyes and I didn't see anger. I didn't see anger. I saw fear. And I had never seen my daddy fearful. And I knew something was different about us and that grocer. Well, I was as a little girl, I didn't always act like the proper little girl. And some of y'all might be just like I was. I enjoyed climbing trees and enjoyed playing in mud. And I was a marbles player. Oh, some of y'all are smiling again. Yes, indeed. I was a marbles player. Do you all remember playing marbles? I do. And I was quite good at it, if I must say. My mama hated me playing marbles. Well, because I was good. And so I would take somebody's marbles and then they'd get upset and want to fight. And I didn't mind fighting them if I needed to. So my mother was always upset at me, always seemed to give me a hard time about the things I loved to do. Well, I was just a little bit older then, and around 9, and I was playing marbles one afternoon, and I had got one of the boys' cat eyes. Now, if you haven't seen a cat eye marble, it's been some time. Some folks don't hardly even play that anymore, but I got that cat eye marble. I was so happy. Well, the game ended, and he asked for his cat eye back, and I said no. I had won it fair and square, and he asked for it back, and I said no. So he did what he did. He leaned over, and he pulled my ponytail. I didn't appreciate him pulling my ponytail. So I did what I did. I hit him in the face. I certainly did. I hit him in the face. Oh, I know it's not the best thing to do, but I was a child. I didn't know any better. And that's what I did. So I hit him in the face. Well, he got all mad. And then he said, "Well, at least my mama is my real mama." And I would have responded to something like that and maybe gotten mad, but there was something about that statement that sat true to me, and I couldn't quite let it go. And so I didn't say anything. I wanted to ask my mom about it, but I didn't think that was going to be right. And so I waited until one of my cousins came around. Now, my cousins, they were one of my cousins. He was a good man. He really was. And one of the things that was wonderful about him was that he was always honest. Although he was much older than me, he was a teenager. He had never lied to me. And I knew that if he hadn't lied to me before, that he wouldn't lie to me now. So without any worries, I asked him as we were walking along one day, what if my parents were my real parents? And that's when he told me that Ori and Susie Smith, well, they weren't my real parents. And he told me about my real mama and daddy, about Hezekiah Gatson and my mother, Millie Riley. He told me that my father worked for the mill. And at the mill, he would work in the evening times. My mom would take care of me. One day, some men came at nighttime and told my mother that my father had been hurt badly in an accident at the mill. They had come to take her to see him at the hospital. Well, she left me with the folks that I knew as my mama and daddy. She left me with them, and she left to go see about my daddy. In the morning, my father arrived home from work completely unscathed and surprised to know that the house was empty. Going next door to the neighbors to see that I was there, and no sign of his wife. It would be just a little less than a week later that her body would rise to the top of a pond. She had been beaten and raped. No one seemed to want to do anything to find out who were the white men that had done this. And my father knew that he could get in trouble for his anger. And he left town and left me with Ori and Susie Smith. I knew his words to be true. And that was the moment that I hated white people. I hated white people. I hated what they had done to me and to my mama and my daddy, and I hated what they had done. I hated even thinking back now to those pork chops. I hated that. And I hated them. And from that moment on, I didn't speak to any white people. The little girls that I used to play with or buy penny candy with, I didn't want to be around them at all. I didn't want nothing to do with them. And that wasn't hard to do since I didn't have to go to school with them or be around them in any way if I didn't want to. And I didn't. One day, as I became a teenager, folks began to say, now that I could be honest about who my mom and daddy were, folks began to say that I looked just like my mother. I was glad about that. And one day I went over to the commissary, as I could do by myself now. And when I got to the commissary on that day, there was a man on the front porch. He was obviously had been drinking. But when he saw me, his eyes got wide, his face turned just pale white, and he seemed to back up in his chair, looking at me as if I was a ghost. And he looked at me. And I presume from the way he looked at me and how I was always told I looked like my mother, that he was one of those men that had done my mother wrong. So I let him get a good look at me. And he would scream and go, no, leave me be. And then he'd run off the porch. Next day I came back, he was on the porch again and had the same reaction. So I began to come to the commissary regularly so I could go and look at this man in the face and let him see my mama. I wanted him to feel all the pain and all the hatred I had. I got to the point where I called him drunken pig. Yes, I did. But it had been some while. I'd been going back and forth as often as I could, hoping to see this man. But I came one day and he wasn't anywhere around. And I came another, he wasn't anywhere around. And I kept looking for him and started to ask about him. The grocer had been watching me and I didn't even know that. And the grocer came to me and said, the man had died. And I looked at the grocer and said, he can't die. Who am I going to hate now? And hate had filled me. Well, over time, I continued on in my life. And there was that time when LC started coming around, Lucius Christopher. Lucius Christopher Bates. He was insurance man, home insurance and life insurance man. And you know how they would come door to door to your house. And some folks do, depending on where you live in the South, they still do that. Come door to door and come month to month and collect what they're going to collect. And he would come around and he was a tall, skinny man. He was. Glasses and right studious, had been to school. And well, I sure enough, I certainly did take a liking to him. He was smart and handsome and kind. And although he was older than me, well, he took a liking to me as well. So in order to do the right thing, he would come and visit by the house, always with permission, but he would come and he'd bring a newspaper from out of town. He'd bring one from New York or Baltimore, the Afro-American from Baltimore. So he'd bring those newspapers down to my daddy, and my daddy loved that. He'd always bring my mother some flowers. For those of you trying to make sure you get in right with the mama, you remember when they used to bring flowers. Brought flowers and then something little for me, a small bracelet or something for my hair and such. And of course, he would be invited for dinner, which didn't bother me at all. And every now and then, he would take us to the moving picture show. And at the moving picture show, we would walk over there and of course have to sit up in the balcony, and he'd take my parents. Of course, they all had to come with us, but we'd walk a little slow behind my parents and try to take each other's hand, of course, not wanting to be seen. And we'd sit in between, one parent on one side and one parent on the other side, with the two of us in the middle, keeping us good. But I sure did like Elsie. As I got older, I was hoping I'd see more of Elsie. And right before the high school was to end for me, my daddy got sick. He had the cancer. And he couldn't work, and so they told him he had to go to the colored hospital. But the colored hospital was too far away. We'd never be able to visit him all the time if it was so far away. And of course, he couldn't go to the white hospital that was right there in Huttig. But we were fortunate that my father was able to go to the Catholic hospital. They allowed colored folk to be there. And so I would go visit him often. I'd walk through those halls with those nuns that were mostly white, and I would never say a word to them, not a single word, no matter how well they treated my father. I didn't have a word for them at all. On what would be my daddy's last day of living, my daddy had been seeing all the hatred, been seeing what was in my eyes, seeing how I treated the nurses. I write about it in my book. It's one of the parts that changed my life. And he came to me and he said some words that day that, well, I don't need to read them to you, but I will. I've never forgotten. He looked at me in the eye and he said, Daisy, you are so filled with hatred. Don't hate white people. Don't hate white people just because they're white. Hate the humiliations that they pour on people. Hate the discrimination that they give to people. Hate the insults that are hurled by people. Hate that. and then do something about it. Because hatred can destroy you. I knew his words were right. And I kissed him on the forehead. And on the way out, I spoke gratitude to each of those nuns, those nurses, Black and white. And I made a determination that I would have my life be one of service and to remove that which caused hate. My father died the next day. And it would not be but a month later that I would leave with LC, and we moved to Kansas City for a little bit, and then quick like moved over to Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, I haven't asked you all any questions at all. I've been just talking, but if you have the opportunity to be able to write something in this thing that they have over here that you can write on, tell me what you know about Arkansas. If you have the opportunity to do that, just put it in there into that, what they call this the chat, yes. Like we're chatting with one another. Even though sometimes I can't see you, we're still chatting with one another. So over there in that chat, if you wouldn't mind, write down for me what it is that you know about Arkansas. I'll wait a minute or so. I'd love to see what you think about the place that I grew up in. Ooh, hot springs. Yes, indeed. Of course, you know that there was a hot springs and there was a colored side of one of the colored resorts there. And that was part of the Chitlin Trails where folks would come from far around to go there. And they would go to but there was a colored side of hot springs and there was the white side of hot springs. Yes, indeed. Wineries. Oh, pretty Southern attitudes. Does that mean that we're pretty in the South? Or that there are some Southern attitudes that are pretty? I wasn't quite certain about that. Oh, the Ozarks. Yes, indeed. I don't know about this President Clinton person. I'm certain that maybe you all are hoping that somebody from Arkansas will one day be president. Very racist. Well, now I would agree with you, I think, a little bit, but it wasn't any, no, I can't agree with you. It wasn't any more racist than any other place that was below the Mason-Dixon line. That would be the truth of it. And in some places, it wasn't so much as racist because they hardly had anybody be racist too. Oh, Conway. Now that's a nice place. I've gone there. You remember Governor Farbus? Lord, most of us are trying to forget him as much as possible. I feel for you on that one. Oh, the hills, the rolling hills. You know that we have the diamonds there, diamond mining. Some of the largest diamond in all of America have been found there. Oh, these are wonderful ideas that you are giving us. You all have been doing a lot of going diamond hunting. There we go. There's someone that knows. Ah, I'm so glad you all are sharing with many poor people. Now that is truth. That is a truth of a truth of a truth. It is most difficult. Many of y'all are remembering the desegregation. So I know when I share with you about that, you're going to have so many things. The Jim Crow South, that was sure. Now, Bull O'Connor is not over in over in Arkansas. I think I know who you're talking about, but that would be Alabama and such, and the Little Rock Dime. Well, I'm so glad that you all have so many thoughts. And I love Arkansas, in spite of it being some of the petty, I suppose, Southern attitudes and racism that's there as well. But it was also my home in some of the most beautiful places. And when we moved to Little Rock in the early 50s, not so long ago, it seems, but when we moved to Little Rock in the early 50s, Little Rock was one of those progressive towns. It was a progressive town. Yes, there was still white only signs and colored only signs in places, but coloreds had their own lives. We didn't need much on the white side anyhow. We had our own dentist, we had our own lawyers and our own debutantes and our own newspapers. We had it all. And it was a progressive town. We went to, to use the same Woolworths. You all know about the Woolworths, and we used the same J.C. Penney's and such like that. So we had the same things. The children, the young people, they all listen to the same music. Well, oh, I tell you, those children just love listening to Johnny Mathis. And Johnny Mathis and the Isley Brothers and the young folks like listening to that, and they like the same music, they dress the same way. That's how it was. And it was a progressive town. The white folk and black folk got along just fine. And that's why in 1954, when Brown versus the Board of Education, when that decision came down that they were going to integrate the schools with great speed, with deliberate speed, that we got excited. We got excited about that because we wanted our schools to be integrated. We wanted that to happen as quickly as possible, and we knew we could do it. The reason we knew is there was another little town that was up toward the north of Little Rock. It was a small town. They didn't have many colored folk there, and they were able to integrate their colored young folk into the school. Now, some out of town folk came to try to make trouble, but the reality is that the school did fine. The Catholic schools had already integrated, and the colleges had already integrated. We were a progressive town. We could certainly do that. You can understand my amazement that when we began to try in 1955 through the NAACP, and I was the president of all the chapters in Arkansas, and I was the liaison with the national NAACP, you can imagine the surprise that we had when we're trying to integrate, and there is in Little Rock, and there is such a tremendous opposition to what we're doing. We got along. Our children played in games together. We worked with each other. And yet here we were in this opportunity to show the progressiveness. And no, there would be no progression when it came to integration. Well, my LC had started a newspaper there, the State Free Press, and so I helped work on the newspaper at times, and helped him at times, and he put in real issues, talked about real things, not just about who was marrying who and who was the new preacher, but he talked about real things happening. We talked about what was happening to move forward civil rights. He spoke clearly about these things. And so it was no surprise to anyone when I worked with the NAACP to bring them in and to go to court in Arkansas, in Little Rock, to ensure that our young people could go to school. Now, I need to show you a little about the school so that you'll see what I'm talking about. Our school was named Dunbar. Our school was named Dunbar School. And Dunbar High School was named after that one and only, some of you all have heard his name, was named after Paul Laurence Dunbar, this young gentleman here, as many, many schools in the South, colored schools in the South were named. Paul Laurence Dunbar was great author and poet and a learned young man, and he died far too young. But his poetry resonated with so many people in the colored community that many of the schools were named after him. Well, this was our Dunbar High School, right here. This was our high school. And it's a functioning high school, although there was not as much money put into it. And eventually we had to gather the last of the money from the Rosenwald to help build the school. But this is where the school where they considered to be equal. They considered this to be separate but equal. But here was the equal. That's the school that was Central High School. And there is certainly no comparing one to the other. Why, the schools were different in so many ways. The cost to build Dunbar High School was $400,000. The cost to build Little Rock School, Senior High School was $1,500,000. They could hold only 1,600 students at Dunbar and 3,000 at Little Rock Senior High School, which is Central School. The textbooks at Dunbar were all hand-me-downs. They were always purchased new for the students over at Central. Only 5,000 library books at Dunbar, compared to 11,000 at Central. 34 classrooms, that was all that was there at Dunbar. 100 classrooms over at Central. We had no gymnasium, no practice field, no science lab, nothing like that over at Dunbar. And all of that over at Central. They were not separate and equal. They were merely separate. Now I see that there's somebody has a hand there. I'm not certain. Had your husband sat in the back of the bus? Why did the driver say that? I'm not seeing. Is that a question for me? I wasn't certain, Wendy. I don't know if that's a question. Oh, that's a question for David. Okay, that's fine. Well, sitting in the back of the bus was all you could sit on those times. So you couldn't sit at the front of the bus. Yes, and that's true. When you came from the north and you come down to some place like Arkansas, you
Actually,
wouldn't. Yes.
Davida is sharing a story that her husband, who is white, sat in the back of the bus, and the driver stopped and
Moved him.
said that he had to either stand or sit at the front, or else he had to get off the bus.
That would be correct, because there were lines you were not to cross. Thank you for explaining that to me, Wendy. I so appreciate that.
And Davida shares that a young boy from Chicago, that her husband was in the Army, he was 19, he had no clue. There were no other seats. He had no idea. So
I understand.
thank you, Davida.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Wendy, for explaining. I wasn't quite certain. Catherine, I see that you have a question. Is that a question you'd like to put over into this chat here? I would certainly be glad to answer it for you if that would be good. But going back to the story, so we wanted our young people to be able to have the opportunity to go to a school that would be able to meet their needs, that they could truly be equal in the education they received. We went on and on talking with Superintendent Blossom and all the people of the school board. There was much opposition. We went to court until finally the court said, yes, you must integrate the school. We decided we would start with high school first, and then we would gradually go to other grades. We had students at Dunbar that filled out applications. Many, many students applied. I helped to go through some of those student applications first, and we decided on students that had excellent grade averages, that were highly involved in what they were doing in school. We wanted our best students to go there. I had several students selected. But then once they were selected, then began the more detrimental opposition. Students began to have to drop out. Their parents were threatened to lose their jobs, threatened to be evicted from their homes. There were crosses burnt on yards. The intimidation factor grew and grew and grew until finally we only had 9 students. Now, because so many of you already acknowledged it, I know that you have heard about those 9 students. But those 9 students were what was going to be left of who could actually attend the school. And I do want to introduce you to those students here in just a second. I have a picture of them, and I thought it would be nice for you to be able to see them. If I can get there. Oh, there we are. Oops. My. Things have gone backwards for me, and I don't think that's very good. Oh, here we are. Here we are. That would be Gloria Ray and Terrence Roberts, Melba Patillo, Jefferson Thomas, Clorlotta Walls, Thelma Mothershead, Melba Jean Brown, Minnie Jean Brown, Minnie Jean Brown, who was the only one that did not make it through the entire year, but it wasn't her fault. Elizabeth Eckford, whose story is the one most of you have heard about more than anyone, and then Ernest Green, who was the only senior of the group of students. And here are the students, and one of the pictures, just fine, fine, fine students they were. And I enjoyed spending time with them. They came to my house every day. We worked on how to be nonviolent. They met with Thurgood Marshall, with Bertrand Russell. They met with people that would help them to be able to enter the school. But the school did not want them there. And I even had to make a decision, was I going to continue to be a part of this? It was during that summer before school would begin. It was in August. I had just finished walking my dog, Skippy. I came inside and I hung up the leash, sat down on the couch in front of the plate glass window, and as I leaned over to get a magazine, a brick came through my window, going right past my ear. It would have hit me if I had been sitting up. I fell to the ground, the sound of the crashing, the men, Elsie and others had been below just talking. They rushed up the stairs, close to the ground, made sure that I was okay. And we looked out and then picked up the brick, and it said, "There's more coming." That night, the men set up guard in our driveway. And during that night, I asked to stand guard for a while. And I sat out there with a pistol in my lap, asking myself the question, would it be worth dying to have these young people enter the school? Now, hearken back to my father. Hate the discrimination. Hate the insults. And do something about it. On that day, I made the decision that even if I would die, I would be there with these young people. And people didn't want us there. I remember the knock on the door when one day, and one of the ladies that was in front of me was a white lady with gloves in her hand, her proper dress on, and her pocketbook right there on the crook of her arm. And I said, "Hello," and she introduced herself, and I asked her if she would like to come in, and she looked around and said, "No, that would be all right." She was simply with the mothers group. And the mothers group was a group of white women that had been actively seeking to not have any colored children come to Central High School. She asked me, "Think about the children. The children. Why would you want your children to be someplace where they are not wanted?" And I looked at her and I said, "I am thinking about the children, because our children want the same education as your children. I think they'll be all right." She was very and highly upset at me, and then turned on heel and walked away. And I thought to myself, oh, there's trouble a-coming. And after several crosses burned on my yard, and those plate glass windows covered over with boards until we just didn't put up any windows anymore, I knew the trouble was coming, but I was more determined than ever that our young people would have this chance. And so it came. They were to enter school on September 4th, 1957. What is that? Just 6 years ago. Now, 6 years later, 63, all that's happened since then, it seems it was years ago, and yet it was only 6. On the evening of September 2nd, Governor Faubus, governor of Arkansas, came on the television and said he would call out the National Guard to protect our children. He wasn't real specific. I didn't know what he meant by our children. Did he mean our children as well? I wasn't certain what that meant. The next day we talked to the students once again and told them where I would meet them, and that from the place where where the bus would drop off a couple of them, and then the rest would gather there and be dropped off by their parents. We would all walk in together. We'd already heard that there were crowds of people coming in town. There were strange cars coming down the road where I lived. I was in the bottom of the hill and yelling obscenities out the window. We'd heard about young people and older people coming from out of town. We knew there would be disturbance, but we still had the hope that we were progressive enough that we'd enter that school. Well, the night, later that night, before I was to go to bed, I received a phone call from one of the white ministers. And he said that he and other white ministers had hoped that they could help us by surrounding our kids with Black and white ministers and walking our kids in. This sounded wonderful to me. And so he told me to call all the students and tell them to meet them at the Baptist Church, First Baptist Church, and I said I would. And I called all the students except for Elizabeth Eckford. I didn't call Elizabeth, she didn't have a phone. But I determined I would wake up in the morning and go by and pick her up. I took a sleeping pill because I hadn't been sleeping well and I wanted to get enough sleep that night. But unfortunately, I overslept. I woke to LC shaking me as hard as he could and telling me to get up, realizing what time it was, throwing on my clothes, forgetting all about phone calls. I got into the car. We turned on the radio and we could hear it. There seems to be a Negro girl coming towards the school now. It was Elizabeth. No child should have to make that kind of trip by themselves. No child should have been subjected to what she was subjected to on that day. And yet, she walked this by herself. On that day, Elizabeth, in the dress that she had made herself, with her saddle Oxfords and her dark glasses, came down on a street where there was the National Guard surrounding the building. And on the other side was a group of people that were white, as you can see by this picture, some dressed in their nicest of clothes. When she said that she walked down that road, they were at first quiet. When she tried to go in between two of the soldiers, and they wouldn't let her in. That's when the crowd began to scream and shout. 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. They called her names. They yelled and screamed at her. Words that she couldn't repeat even to me. She said she wasn't really afraid until she went to it further down and watched a white student enter between two guards, figured that was where she needed to be, and she tried to enter there and couldn't get through. She tried to push her way through and they backed her up. She said that's where she got scared. She eventually safely made it over to the other bus stop at the other end of the school and was able to make it to her mother. I will never forgive myself for putting her in a position where she would have to face these people, these progressive people, these hateful, hateful people. And she would have to deal with them alone. We went back to court. We went to court. We demanded to be brought in. We talked to the police. Over and over again, people said, Superintendent Blossom said, maybe this is not the year to do it. We stayed in court. We were determined. We called Governor Faubus. We called our legislators. We demanded our children to be let in. And finally, on September 20th, after several attempts, we were brought back in, surrounded by the police. They wouldn't let me go in the school building with the young people. But they told me very quickly, as they had to smuggle the young people out, and those 9 came to my house, as they did every evening. And on that evening, one of them said, the people were calling out, just send us one, just send us one. We can string up one. And when I saw the officer who dropped the children off that day, he was shaking, physically shaking. And he said, I have never heard people speak that way about children. It took President Dwight Eisenhower to open the door to let people in. It took the Guard, the 101st from Fayetteville, from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to come and take the place of the National Guard and to escort our children on the September 25th. And someone interviewed me and said, are you happy now that the students are in? And I said, happy? Am I supposed to be happy that it took the regular army to take 9 young people and let them go to school? Why would I be happy? And inside that school, those young people were not protected. They had been told that once inside the school, they were on their own. And every afternoon they returned with stories of being kicked, pushed down the steps, fingers in lockers, food poured on them. They had already been told they couldn't join any extracurricular activities. And even when one of them tried out, Minnie Jean, she was told in no uncertain words that her kind were not welcome. Some teachers sat the child, the teenager, that child, on another side of the room, away from every other student. Some never talked to the student themselves. But yet these students stayed, except for Minnie Jean Brown, who responded on a day when chili was the lunch of the day. She had had enough food thrown at her. And on that day, she took that bowl of chili and put it on a boy's head. Of course, I didn't laugh then, but I understood her anger and frustration. She was expelled from the school in February. The young man, of course, was not, in spite of what he had done. Suspended for a week and then able to return. But Minnie Jean Brown was able to go to New York and have an opportunity to learn up there, and sponsored by a couple that brought her up there. But in the end, there was one who graduated. Ernest Green became the first colored graduate of Central High School. We had integrated. And before the next school year, every single Little Rock, Arkansas school was shut down. Every public school was shut down, just so they didn't have to integrate. That didn't make us less likely to do it. It made us want it more. That did not stop us, nor should it stop us today. When we see setbacks, we do not need to stop. When we feel setbacks, we don't go backwards, we go forwards. We use the courts more. We stand up more. We're willing to decide in our minds more that we will be the people that will be the change. That we will dissolve the discrimination, the hatred, and the insults, and we will turn them back by the way that we stand up and go forward. When they destroyed my husband's newspaper, no one would advertise and we couldn't afford it anymore. My husband, LC, did not stop in his dream. He kept pushing forward, trying time and time again. When I was asked to go up to New York and work with the NAACP and work with other schools, I eagerly went, knowing I would be separated from my husband for a while, but I eagerly went so I could be more of a difference. And the reason I wrote this book, and the reason why the Honorable Eleanor Roosevelt wrote in the beginning of my foreword of the book, the reason she was willing to do this is because she wanted us to no longer sit on the sidelines, black or white, but to get into the fight for civil rights for everyone. And that is what I want to say to you. I have been in a life where I could have stayed angry and have had hatred, and I would have been destroyed. But I chose not. I chose to fight that hatred in a different way. And I am asking, in this year of 1963, as we get on with this fight, as we see the progress that has been made, but so much more that must be made, as we see still the bodies of our young men and young women who are willing to walk and protest, as we see this happening, we remind ourselves that it is time to continue to stand up. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, that we choose a side. I'm hoping that you will remember this in the upcoming days. I certainly have spoken far too much, but I do want to give you an opportunity to ask a few questions, if you wouldn't mind, a few questions of me, and then I will let Mrs. Arnold come. I'm certain she is excited. She doesn't have as much time as I do because I get to be the one with the book. I do want to remind you again of the book, The Long Shadow of Little Rock, and I hope that you will go to find that. So I see that there's a Catherine Johnson. She's been very patient. And so what I'll do is I will just bring over Catherine, I'm sorry, Wendy, did you want to find out the questions, or did you want to let them have a voice and ask the questions themselves?
Hi, I'm happy to do that.
All right.
An anonymous attendee would like to know, when the public schools closed down,
Yes.
what took their place?
For white students, what took their place were private schools. Almost every student was put into a private school, and they changed the law to say that then states' money, states' funding can go to private schools. Up to that point, no state funding went to private schools. But once they shut that down, the public schools, and everyone was going, they had the state money sent to private schools. And then our students, well, we did the best we could. We took the Little Rock Nine actually were given scholarships to high schools all over the country. And so we made sure they got into those schools. And then for the other students, we did our best to teach them in all the places that we possibly could. And that included trying to open up some of those colored schools just so that we could teach our children there, because they obviously weren't going to integrate into our schools. And so that is what we did. Yes. Another question.
Have you kept up with the young people to monitor where they are now in their lives?
I have, and they have graduated from high school. They're in college. Ernest is out, have graduated and from college now, and it's been wonderful to see the work that they're continuing to do, making choices and differences in their life. They're still. We would get bags upon bags of letters that would come to my house, and myself and those 9 young people would answer all of those letters that would come from literally around the world, where they were seen as heroes, something they never asked to be. They always told me, we never asked to be that. But I reminded them that what they were heroes, that they walked through, and that I had helped them do this walk, and I was proud to be able to walk with them in this. And so I remain to be in touch. I feel like I didn't have any children of my own, so I feel like they are my own children.
Talk to us, please, about your relationship with Thurgood Marshall and their relationship with Thurgood Marshall as well.
Well, they just, well, who couldn't adore Thurgood Marshall? It just tall man, tall man, and that voice and that commanding ability that he had. And you just wanted, you just knew that he was going to take care of things. He came in with a plan, and that was what was so exciting. He didn't flaunt his education. He was quite well educated, of course, but he didn't flaunt that education. He remembered who he was. He remembered where he had come from, and he was able to use that experience to help inform how he would engage with the people that he met when he would travel to different places. When the students met them, oh, they peppered him with questions about what he had done in school and his college days at Howard University and the work he was doing with the NAACP. They obviously had kept tabs on him even more than I had. I was delighted to have him. He often stayed at our home. Elsie and I often had him in our home, and he was there for those court cases. And when he wasn't there, of course, we've had Whitney Young come as well, and others that would come and be a part of those court cases. And so my relationship with him was one of great respect. And he also respected me to be able to speak up for these young people and would ask me what was best because he knew I knew the lay of the land of Little Rock and who was who and such like that. So I appreciated that he didn't just come in and take over completely. He also asked questions about what the community was about.
Did you work closely with the students' parents?
I did. I'm sorry, was there more to the question? I
No.
apologize, Wendy.
Please,
Okay.
please continue.
I did work closely with the students' parents, but I saw the students every afternoon. They came to my house after school, and we talked about what was happening inside school. But I told them, and they knew themselves, that they could not go home and tell these things to their own parents. And I knew that, and they knew that as well, because they knew that if they told what was happening in school to their own parents, parents would take them out. Any parent would do that. And I know I say they're like children to me, and they are, but I understood that they understood. Their integration was bigger than themselves. And so I knew that we needed to not speak of these things. And I told them very clearly not to even speak of any atrocities to the newspapers, because the newspapers would make it so to say that that there was all this confusion happening in the schools. And with that confusion happening in the schools, you see, this is what happened when colored folk go to white schools. And we didn't want that to happen. So I was close to the parents, but I, like the children, did not tell them everything that was happening in school.
Did you work with any psychologists that year to make sure that the children remained healthy? Because that's a lot, there was a lot of pressure, and you were asking a lot of children. So can you talk about how you made sure that they were well emotionally?
Well, that's part of the reason they came to the house every afternoon, was so that they had a place and a person that they could talk with. We always had, and we had begun to train them in nonviolent techniques long before they went to school. So that was part of the training, was to be able to look at what was going to be happening. They were encouraged to write in diaries, and some of you may know that Melba Patillo certainly did, and she's talked a little bit about her diary and how that has helped her and such. And now that, of course, that they've graduated and moved on, some of them have begun, excuse me, I have begun to talk a little bit more about what their experiences were. But I tried to make my home a place that would help them to be safe in what they said and what they felt. And if there were people that we needed to bring in, we certainly would. But I became the person that held on to the stories that they told, and made sure that they would be okay.
Did the nine become closer with one another?
Oh, yes, they did. And they enjoyed the time together with one another because they were bound. They were literally bound by the experience of what happened. Even Minnie Jean Brown, even though she wasn't there, was still a part of the group. You know, she was never not considered. They never changed it to the Little Rock Eight, in other words. It was always the nine of them. And they did remain in close contact with one another. And it's always so good to see that.
Were there any white allies in Little Rock?
There were one of the even on the day that Elizabeth was trying to walk in the school. One of the professors' wives at Philander College, a white woman. Philander College is the local Negro college, but had white teachers as well. And she actually helped walk with Elizabeth Eckford a little bit and rode the bus with her for a little while. And then the sheriff. Well, originally the sheriff was. Initially, the sheriff was really not supportive of us trying to integrate the school. But once he had seen what was happening and the riots that were happening, he could no longer be an advocate for what the rioters and protesters were doing. He became a great ally to us. Unfortunately, it was not long after the schools were integrated that he actually killed himself. And I wonder often if that was because of this situation and the fact that he saw friends and even family that were different than what he thought they were. Superintendent Blossom wasn't always an antagonist. He was supportive that once the decision was made, that the decision would be one that we would go through with. And so he did speak to the teachers and to the principal and expected that the students would be taught. And so he wasn't completely an antagonist, not completely an ally later either. And then the federal district judge, Ronald Davies, was also a great ally for us because we were kept having to come to his court, and he kept reminding them this what needed to happen. And then the ministers, the white ministers, those that stayed around long enough, because some of them were removed from their post after that point. After they spoke that they would spoke publicly that they would support children being connected together, then those white ministers also were very supportive of us.
Wow. How long did it take for the Little Rock schools to open again and fully integrate?
It was so we did not get the 58 to 59 school year, but in 59 they opened again, and again they integrated the Central High School, and Jefferson Thomas was still there of the original Little Rock Nine and did graduate there, but they also had other students. And after that, they really did remain integrated and integrated all the schools. It didn't. After 1 year of not doing it, and the pressure that they received from the legal system, as well as even the pressure of those who were trying to stop putting Little Rock on stop making Little Rock this place that was not looked at as progressive anymore. They had a reputation of being progressive. There were companies and businesses coming into this area, and they were stopping. They didn't want to be there. They didn't want to be known as the place that had the one picture of Elizabeth Eckford walking through, and that one picture that went around the world. And this is what people thought of around the world. People in other countries thought this was emblematic of what America was.
The white woman in that picture.
Yes. You mean the girl in the picture?
Yes, the girl, the young woman with that hate-filled face, snarling at the student. What were her? Did she have any regrets? Did she ever apologize?
I have I do know for a fact that she did not return to school. Again, her picture went all over the world. She had, and I understand why she didn't return to school. I don't think I would have in that light.
That year, the next day, she did not.
She did not return to school that year.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yes. And at least I have that on good authority. And that's what she was known for. And I had heard that she wanted to be able to do apologies, and I'm not certain where that went, but I'm also not certain that an apology is all that would be needed.
Okay. Were the parents of the students upset with you after they found out what their children had experienced?
They may have been, concerned, but no harm came to the students, and no ultimate harm came to the students. Um, I'm certain that they would have preferred that I let them know more, but the students knew that they couldn't let their parents know more. Uh, They the students knew themselves.
Did any of the white children befriend any of the 9 that year?
There were a few that had at least a passing relationship and could speak to one another. But I would not say that they all had allies in the sense of people standing up and speaking, but they did get along. And after a while, there were students that were asking, white students that were like, stop the protest, let us just go to school and work it out. And so there were students that did that. Um, but I think by the end of the school year, it was less about the color than it had been at the beginning of the school year, and but there were still challenges. May I have just one more question only? I do
Absolutely,
have to.
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for being so generous with your time.
Oh,
You told us about the first school days, but what about the rest of the year? Did they ever walk into school separately? Did they always go as a group? Were they always taken to your home by police car?
they were generally taken to school together. They were escorted to the school by the 101st Airborne for most of the school year. If that is not a sadness,
Wow. Okay.
then I don't know what to say. But yes, but inside the school, there was no protection that was given to them inside the school.
Unbelievable.
Thank you.
Ms. Bates, thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your time. I
so
know
much.
that you have to move off to your next appointment, but
I
that
do. I'm going into Chicago, a little bit further into Chicago this evening, and then I will make my way on out of Illinois and begin the process of going from state to state and hoping that I can share more about the book. I want to thank each one of you, and I do hope that you will remember that we still need to speak up and speak out. And those steps that look like they're going backward, do not accept that we're going backwards. Move forward to the next thing that we can do, the next thing that we can do, because we will change our country and we will fight against this hatred. Thank you all so much for letting me
thank
come
you.
today.
And you will disappear, and Sheila Arnold is going to come in.
Hello, everyone.
There you are. Look
Here I am. Can breathe a little bit more now.
Wow, 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 wow.
So that obviously, I want to thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you, Wendy, for inviting me, and to the Levy Foundation for the opportunity for these lectures to take place. I'm really honored, and thank you. So many people stayed for so long. I'm just really delighted that you could stay. Would you like to introduce me formally, Wendy? I'll be quiet if you like.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would like to, hang on just one second. Okay. Sheila Arnold has been gifted by God with performance skills and has been using this talent since she was 8 years old. She has been a full-time storyteller for 17 years, traveling throughout the United States and sharing a variety of stories, whatever fits in her mouth, as well as doing historic character presentations and Christian monologues. At her core, Ms. Sheila, as she is commonly called, is a professional imaginator with a passion, vision, and ministry of healing hearts, unifying communities, and reminding people to share their stories. Professional imaginator, I love that.
Well, yes, that's not mine. I got that from a taxi cab driver.
Oh my.
I told him what I did, and then I told him a story. He said, you are a professional imaginator. I said, I am taking that one. I'm taking that one. So, well, I do need to say a couple of things about, of course, of Daisy Bates. So one of the things that I want to make sure that I say is that this really is her book, The Long Shadow of Little Rock. And there's another book that, two other books that I used. And if we can type them in, I'll try to type them into the thing. One of them is called Daisy Bates, and it's Civil Rights Crusader from Arkansas, written by Griff Stokely. I'll try to put that over here in the.
You know what? Don't even worry about that. You can send that to me privately, and I'll include it in the follow-up email.
That'll be wonderful. So I'll send that. And then another book that I use, which is a chapter book for young adults, but it's a fantastic book for adults as well. It's called Warriors Don't Cry, and this is Melba Patillo's diary that she was writing, and so she has this is the diary itself. And so just really wonderful, wonderful things in this particular book. So those are two of the main books. And then I've spent quite a bit of time just researching. I have a whole folder over here of all kinds of things about the school, including a couple of things about Central High School that I think you might find interesting. One, Central High School is a national park. It is the only school actively running school in the United States of America that is also a national park.
Well, and why was it designated a national park?
Why would it not be? It's probably one of the most iconic places of integration and desegregation we have in our country today. And so that makes it it's worth making sure it's preserved and the history told. Now, across the street from it, in what was the old gas station that was there, they've built an actual national park kind of center right there, so you can have some more information. It's got wonderful exhibits and such, but the actual school is a national park. It's fascinating. And I had the joy to be asked when I was first starting this. A friend of mine asked me to do some research and begin this process, and I did. And because I was they wanted me to do a presentation for Daisy Bates Day in Arkansas. So where other people may have George Washington's birthday, Abraham Lincoln's birthday, all that kind of President's Day stuff like that, there are various places that have other days on that day. Most of them, if they're Southern, are like, it's Robert E. Lee's birthday, so it's Lee holiday or Lee celebration. But Daisy, in Arkansas, it's Daisy Bates Day. And so I was asked to come and perform that weekend, but I needed to do an audition. So I came. At my audition was Minnie Jean Brown, who was not Minnie Jean Brown anymore because she was married by that time. But I was like, OMG. And I didn't even know what OMG was back then, but it was OMG. It was just like amazing. And so here I am. The woman that had brought me in was her daughter, who's the National Park Service, was her daughter. And she just happened to be visiting. Minnie Jean Brown did on that day while I was doing this. So I did the performance and the audition and got the seal of approval from everybody, including her. Except that one thing she said was that I had a little too much Southern in my way of speaking, and I just need to speak more proper, more like my own self. So you'll hopefully hear just a tiny bit of Southern, but more of how I speak. And then I actually also quizzed my aunt, because I found out that my aunt actually, we called her my aunt. She was a very close friend of our family's, and she actually worked for Daisy Bates. And I didn't know that until I started doing all this. And so she helped me out with that as well. But also Minnie Jean Brown said, I am required to do two things every time I do this presentation. So here is what I'm required to say from her every time I do this, and I'm making sure I say it. I don't ever want to go anywhere and have her hear me and not, not know that I didn't say that. She said the first thing was that what she learned is that fear changes people, and that she remembers how people looked. That the ladies were dressed in nice dresses, and some had gloves, and they had pocketbooks, and the men had ties and their hats on. They didn't look like what we think of as what racist or KKK kind of people are going to be. They look like they were just people that her family knew, and that others knew, that they'd interacted at times, but they were afraid. And when we become afraid of what is new to us or change, we respond oftentimes in violence. And that is what she saw happen. So when we begin to see in ourselves that we're responding in a way to change with the fearfulness that causes us to want to almost push back, that's when we need to look at ourselves and see, is there something in us that is just afraid? And we need to cross over to where we understand what is happening to help rid ourselves of that fear. And we have to help others to rid themselves of that fear of change. And then the second thing she said, and actually I mixed them up. This is actually the first thing she said, but the second one she also said, but what she said was, we didn't mean to be heroes. We weren't trying to be heroes. We were just trying to go to a better school. That's all we were trying to do. So if we can be heroes, then each person can be a hero just by going and doing the next right thing. And so I make sure I say those two things because she told me to, and I'm obedient to that. And the Little Rock Nine there's only one that has died, and that would be, oh, I'm sorry, I should have done that really quickly. Sorry, I should have showed you that. Hold on a second. There it is. So this is Daisy Bates, and that's what she really looks like. And here are the Little Rock Nine with with Bill Clinton, who many of you talked about. And I always have to be, when I'm in character, I don't know who he is. I have no idea. So when I do this in front of children and I ask them that question, they always say Bill Clinton. And particularly when I'm up in New York, in Chappaqua, and I do that, oh, Bill Hillary Clinton. And I'm like, I don't know who that is. And the kids go, who is this weird woman that doesn't know them? But here are the Little Rock Nine with President Clinton. And the only one that has died is, if I'm correct, it's Jefferson Thomas. Maybe getting the boys, but everyone else is alive and well.
Wow.
And so, and they have, Carlotta Walls has gone to, she married someone that was over in England, over in Europe, I think Sweden or Switzerland, I can't remember which. And then Minnie Jean Brown married somebody that's up in Canada. They've joined the military. They're still activists. They do wonderful things. They still were, and they still know each other and such like that. So really, but almost all of them moved out of Little Rock. Elizabeth Eckford was still there the last time that I heard about her. So, and that young woman that did yell behind her, Elizabeth Eckford, did eventually get a chance to make that apology. And for a while, there was reconciliation, and they went on tour together to talk about that. But one of the things that was a challenge was that people still brought up the fact that the young white woman had said this, and that still kept coming up, like, when would it ever be forgiven? And there was discussions about that. It's really hard because it's not a thing you forget, and it still happens. And so they didn't tour as much anymore after that. So.
Wow.
So I don't know if I've answered everybody's question, because I don't know if we got to all the questions.
We got a lot of the comments are just
Okay.
are not just, but are
Mhm.
feedback and thanks, gratitude, thank you, bless you, thank you for the positive message. Um, it, you know, I'm embarrassed to say I had never heard of Daisy Bates until I read about the impersonations, historical impersonations that you do.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you were available to come and talk to us. Her, I mean, it was heartbreaking to hear about what happened to her parents. Uh, and they never found the person who killed, or
Right.
people who killed. Ugh,
That's-
horrible, horrible.
but it was a time where you wouldn't even begin to look for that. I mean, you just didn't. It was an accepted thing. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So it's just, an accepted thing. And so really, yeah, it's hard to think about that. And I'm sorry, it was not Carlotta Walls who went overseas. It was Gloria Ray. I had to go back and look. I was like, I think I got the wrong lady on that.
Tell us about the other impersonations that you do.
So I do 13 other women, 12 other women in history from the 1600s all the way to the 1970s. And they include, I will not name them all, but they include One Judge, who is the personal maidservant of Martha Washington, and who's recently had a book, there's a book written about her called Never Caught by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. Amazing. And last year, right before pandemic time, I had the opportunity to do a research be a research fellow at Mount Vernon. I've been doing her for quite some time, but that month I got to be there at Mount Vernon in Virginia, at George Washington's place, and do just nothing but research. It was awesome. I also portray Madam C.J. Walker, and I love portraying her. And she, of course, she came to Chicago many times and did selling there and did presentations there, and also went to conferences there. And then I also portrayed, a little bit after Daisy Bates, I portrayed Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a voting rights activist from Mississippi. So those are some of the women that I portray. Definitely a wide variety of women. I love this way of teaching history. I think the most fun is to be able to teach history this way. I think it's much more memorable, and gives people a sense of, what would have been like. And it takes a lot to do the research, but then there's a lot of space in between the research where you have to kind of go, what's the best way I can bring this up? What's the best way I can do it? Like, I know she really played marbles. She actually talks about that. She actually talks about winning the cat's eye, and that's how she ever gets to that. So that may sound like, did she make that up? No, she actually writes that, but her not looking at the nuns as she's walking in, she doesn't write that, but she does write that her father noted that she was filled with hate. Well, how would he know that? So I can put in that, that she didn't see some things, that she didn't speak, and he would have seen that. So I also need to say this to you, because this is what I also learned, is that Daisy Bates very much felt like she made sure to put herself in the middle of being and seen as a person that was really a part of the mix with everything in regards to Little Rock Nine. And the feelings that she had towards the Little Rock Nine were not necessarily in all instances reciprocated. And there were times that some of the young people wanted to talk to the press about what they were dealing with, and they were told very clearly not to do that by Daisy Bates. And so there's a lot more to her story. And so I portray her the way that she wanted to be portrayed, the way that she portrays herself. But I've also read other books which say that there's some things she doesn't quite tell you enough information about Elsie. You find out more information about that, about her husband, and then you find out more information about that she doesn't always tell the truth about her age. So so when I portray her, I have to portray her as herself. And so I've had people sometimes, but wasn't she born in such and such? And I'm like, if I'm portraying her, I can't say that. I'm like, I don't really talk about my age. And if someone's read an autobiography of her, they might ask her about things that she refused to talk about. So in character, I refuse to talk about them when I'm in her character. So I try to explain it to people afterwards, and they go, "Well, that doesn't seem like what I read." I'm like, "Yeah, because she didn't like that." That's one of the joys of doing a historic character is when you portray the person, you have to portray them as they felt like they were portraying themselves, which doesn't always comport with what truth is.
Yeah, don't we know that? Remind me again, what organization was she working for when all of this started?
She was the president of the Arkansas. She was the NAAA. She was the president of the NAACP Arkansas chapters. So all the chapters in Arkansas, she was like the liaison between them and, in the major office, the head office.
And were there other states that were as segregated that considered going first with this integration effort?
Oh, they did. The other states went first. So they were not the first to do this. And they weren't the first school in Arkansas to do this. They had already integrated the universities. They'd already integrated all the Catholic schools. They'd already integrated small little schools. And that's why when she says that there was a small school district that had already done it, they'd already done it. So, so they weren't the first. They were major because of what, of just how long it went on and how it was major because of the newspapers and all the protests that were coming in. There were people coming in, both white and black, that were coming in about this particular, school, and people were determined to not let the school be, because it was looked at as a progressive city, as a city that, and if this city changed, then wouldn't other cities change as well? But they weren't the first to integrate. But they were definitely a big deal.
Were they the only school that the president was required to send in the National Guard?
As far as
because
I don't know. I don't know because I don't know if up north during the time of
with Boston, with
Boston and stuff. Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there were others that were sent in for that. And my next thing would be Boston integration. I don't know if they were sent in for that because those were riots as well. Yeah. So I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm glad you asked because it made me have to stop and think, because normally I would just say yes. And I'm like, no. I don't think I know.
Well, I mean, at that time, I'm not aware of any other, there's nothing, there are no other schools that come to mind, with the Memphis 9 or the Memphis 10 or something like that.
Right.
So it was a big deal.
It was a big deal, and and other places are getting integrated as well. But it was definitely a big deal. But I don't think we can say that we're the only. It's unfortunate that 20 years later, during busing situations up north, it's the same stuff that was happening down south. It's just that it's not talked about like that anymore. Like they're the same thing.
Tell us about the end of her life.
At the end of her life, she eventually she does travel quite a bit. Elsie is her husband. She enjoys the popularity of the media. She eventually leaves Arkansas, and there are words that maybe there's some complexity in her marriage and some difficulties, but she goes up to New York. I'm trying to be conscientious about this.
That was very diplomatic. There was some complexity.
So she goes up to New York and starts working up there, and she does a ton of stuff. She is really good on TV. Okay, she's really good at that particular thing. So they have her up there. She writes her book. She goes around. She is a part of the March on Washington. She is the only woman that speaks at the March on Washington, the only one. So which is a pretty big deal. She travels quite a bit. The newspaper is gone, so Elsie can't get the newspaper revived. Eventually, she goes back home, and she stays, of course, with him, and she does some speaking engagements and such, and eventually she also begins to work with um, uh, work in places that's combating hunger. That's working on women's rights and empowerment of women and girls. She restarts the newspaper again, doesn't last very long, and then she dies. And I have to give you the date she dies, but I have to go back and look again because I'm
It's
really
okay.
bad about looking at the death of people. So, but
And
she ends her life really she ends her life in Little Rock, Arkansas.
was she um, considered an old woman when she passed away?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I'm just making sure that I get the right date. So November 4th, 1999, she died.
Oh, that was recently. I mean,
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
recently.
Yeah, no, kind of recently. Yes.
Um,
It's funny that we think it's recently, and there are young people who are like, "Oh my gosh, that's so long ago."
but none of those young people are watching right now. Um, wow. Uh,
She was 85 when she died.
oh, that's a good long run.
It's a
Okay.
good long run.
Did she had she gone to college?
No, she really hadn't.
Okay.
Did she?
I mean, she made a difference.
She did. Hmm.
She followed her father's advice,
Yes,
and
she
she
did.
was able to learn from that experience and give up the hatred and just be motivated.
It is.
Did her adoptive parents ever have any other children?
Um, I think they did. But I think I came across they may have had another child. Uh, but I'm not certain, so I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna leave it at that.
And did she ever regain contact with her birth father or
There
any?
is some that say that they did. There's some writing that says that she may have had some. But we at least know what the names are, which is kind of interesting that we at least know
or
their names now.
or her mother's people? Anybody from her?
Not there again. It's at some point in life there were people that claimed to be family of her, but she had also made a name for herself by that time. I don't know. I hope I'm not. I don't know how to say
That's
that
okay.
any other
Okay.
way. So,
Um,
because sometimes when you get to have a name for yourself, people that are family come out of the woodwork.
yes, yes. Um, so you've been doing this for a long time.
I have.
How did you get your start?
I started at Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, Colonial Williamsburg, which is a historic museum, the largest historic outdoor museum in the country, here in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I'm in Hampton, Virginia right now. And so I started working there and did some character work, the storytelling work there and the character work. And then in 2003, God opened the door and said, "It's time for you to go." And I stepped out doing one character, Old Bess, and some women from the Bible that I portrayed, and thought that that's really the direction I was going to be going, was towards women in the Bible. And that got changed up, and people started asking for more historic characters. And so then I stumbled into many other people in history in lots of different ways. Teachers would ask, do you have someone that does business? And like, yeah, because at that point in time, I was newly to this world. So you said yes to everything. And I did. So I said yes at least 12 more times to people and portraying people. And now I have a really good variation of people, but I'm still looking at changing some, and over time others get to be less requested, and that's good too.
Are all the people that you portray deceased?
Yes, thank you. It's I say that because you just, it's like meeting somebody that knows someone and you're like, oh, the reason I do dead people is so I don't have to meet their people and worry about what I'm going to say that's wrong. But yes, and what's really funny is when even I do dead people, I do meet people that knew them. On Daisy Bates Day, people came up to me. I look nothing like Daisy Bates. People came up to me and like, Daisy, we haven't seen you in so long. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't know she's dead. And they would show me pictures that they had of, and I'm like, I'm certain I am not that person. And I did Madam C.J. Walker, and her great granddaughter, Alilia Bundles, is a wonderful writer. She's the writer of the book you use for anybody who portrays Madam C.J. Walker. She ended up on a Zoom call that I was doing a presentation, and she ended up on the call. I was like, just pitter patter, pitter patter, pitter patter. So usually I do, and mine is literally just from fear. And there's one woman I'd like to portray who is alive, and that is Bishop Desmond Tutu's wife. I would like to portray her. And one, because I didn't know he had a wife. That would be number one. And then two, I think it would be a great way to talk about him through her eyes, but also to hear about her life.
Great. I'm sure you're gathering up the research to work on that.
I am. So I have a couple other women that I'm looking into as far as portraying women, and I'm doing a lot of historical storytelling as well. So not just a person, but stories on historical things, and which is a great way to tell history which is high story, is to tell stories about these different events, and they have a huge program called Locks Open, which is about the Underground Railroad, but it's usually parts of the Underground Railroad we've never heard about. And it doesn't include, I do not portray Sojourner Truth or Rosa Parks or Harriet Tubman on purpose. I have chosen the women that I've chosen mostly because people haven't heard about them. So it's good, Wendy, that you hadn't heard much about Daisy Bates. That's part of the reason why I choose the women I choose, is because there's so many women that have done such great things that we don't know the names of. And it's also a reminder that just because you feel like you might not be making a difference doesn't mean that you aren't.
It's very wise. And you do a lot of programs with schools.
I do. Schools, museums, libraries, festivals, on and on and on. And I've, even during the pandemic, I've done a lot of programming that has been on Zoom, and they've gone pretty well. I've enjoyed doing them, actually. Well, they're tiring, they're exhausting because you can't see the audience. But what I have found is that people tend to feel like they're closer to the person because I can look right at you and like be in your home, and you and I are the only people in the room together. That's what it kind of feels like. And so we call it the front row experience. Whereas if I was in a large auditorium, some people would see me really well, and some people just wouldn't. So they miss certain things, even though I try my best. It's a very different experience.
Sure.
And yes, Valerie, true, I do present to a lot of school children. This particular program, Daisy Bates, is my top request comes from 8th grade classes around the country, because this is part of what they're discussing in school, but it's also a great age of, thinking about they're about to be high school students.
Absolutely.
And this is something that they don't have to think about, but certainly was. And it's a great way to also talk about bullying and how you continue walking through, even though that is happening to you, and how you should stand up for those who are being bullied.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Paula is asking, have you considered doing Ida B. Wells?
I have, and I'd love to do her. I really would. But the only reason I won't do her is because I have some really, really good friends that do her, and I was like, I'm good. So, and when I started doing some of the women that I portray now, I didn't know anybody else doing them. So, when Ida B. Wells is somebody that there were people already portraying her. There were very few people portraying Madam C.J. Walker when I first started doing that, and many more people portraying Maggie Lena Walker, who was the first banker, African-American female banker over in Richmond, Virginia. So I tend to have picked people that are not as well known. on purpose. And if I know that there are lots of people that are doing it, another character, that I generally don't choose that character.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And not because I don't, I love, it's better.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're
This was
welcome.
such a pleasure. I hope you will come back and
I would love to.
regale us with another one of your characters, and we will be in touch. Thank you, everyone, for your attention, your participation. It was really a fun, interesting, and informative afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me come.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Everyone, next week our speaker is Jill Weinbanks, who was the only female attorney on the Watergate team, and she has written a book called The Watergate Girl. It's a fantastic read, and she has great stories. She's an analyst on MSNBC. So interesting, so smart. She's talking about making commentary on the Dennis Chauvin trial. She's had lots of really interesting comments about the insurrection on January 6th. It's going to be a great conversation. Completely different than this, but equally as interesting. So I hope you will join us. Sheila, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
We will do this again.
Will do.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.